Katie, to see how we got up that number. That's the only thing that I want to point out to you, and then I can maybe answer other questions. But at this time, if you want to call on Ms. McCarty.
Ms. McCarty, would you like to speak? Maybe you have,
I
share, or does the board have any questions?
I'm just here to answer any questions that the board may have about the budget. There was one question, am I speaking okay? I'm hearable. That was related to page 11 of the budget document. The question was, why did 7,300 go up? Let me make sure I got this right. By 370,000. And I was able to research a lot of that. Most of it was in salaries. Last year, I found that a lot of the principals' salaries were missing. Not principals themselves, but assistants principals and people that were supposed to be in there. I've got their names, not that it matters. But that was why, for $370,000, it was about 6 positions that were not budgeted in that line item last year. And they are properly budgeted. And you can see historically they've been spent there in 18-19 actual. And they've been spent there in 19-20 actual. It's just that in the original budget, for some reason, and I was here, as you recall, I was here for the 19-20 budget. But I was the third CFO. You had Mr. Veal, then you had Mr. Yanisek, and then you had me. And that continued to be a concern. And I thought you will remember Mr. Yanisek saying something's not right. And part of that was, if you weren't there in the beginning to create the budget and salaries, as I was this year, you don't know what got in and what got out. And that was part of it. So that was one of the issues. 7,900, why did that one go up? We talked about that. I want to make sure we did have that understood, though, was that we had moved the SRO program from the Board of Education where it did not belong. I know everybody said that didn't make sense there. Well, you're correct. According to the Red Book, it should have been coded to the 7,900, and that's where it's been moved. And that's the SRO program. I believe that's all I have. You did ask one question last week, and that was what we did with the master's program, because we told you it was back in. It is back in full at 100,000. I did try to get that reduced, whatever, but there was too much concerns. We have already spent $41,000 this year. So I think that's the only
The master's program made its way into language in the contract. We will be targeting that, and I'm sure that's going to be an opener when they come through. So probably before the next board meeting, I'm going to need an executive session, okay? For you to give us parameters on what we can and can't.
Before the next one.
Right.
So,
At the next board meeting,
Oh,
which
at-
would be whatever the date that is, the 18th, something like that.
how about
Then right after the board meeting, we'll have a quick executive session. What is that date?
So Ms. McCarty, all of the changes that you were just telling us about, did you reflect those in the budget that you sent to us?
Those were already reflected in the budget that was sent to you.
You've already made those corrections?
They were corrected after the first reading between the first and second. So yes, like the $100,000 was in this document already.
What
You just
about-
asked how much it was.
What about the supplements that we discussed that weren't budgeted? You said you didn't have those budgeted in the salaries.
They weren't budgeted in 1920. In 2021, I put them in where they belonged. Yeah, in 2021, I put them in.
I thought you said at our last workshop that they weren't budgeted
Oh, no, they were
in
budgeted.
the salaries or something. Was that, do you recall that, Mr. Paletti, what we were discussing with that?
Yeah, I think what we were, last meeting was sort of a source of confusion because you can't pay for something that's not budgeted.
Right.
So it was budgeted, but just not in the right place. And then before we ended that meeting, remember you said, because I looked at it and asked Mrs. McCarty, you are telling me that these supplements are budgeted? She said, yes. So they're in here.
So they are in there.
They are in here.
I will clarify, last year, the year that ended 1920, they were, remember we had that plug figure in the superintendent's office because the salary matrix that Mr. Yanisek swore by showed that he was going to have more expenses because in part of the supplements that was actually in the budget. So last year, when he did the budget, he put it in that one, among whatever he needed to balance, he put it in there. So that's what you're saying, it was
It was
budgeted
budgeted.
in
and that's-
1920. It just wasn't budgeted
If
at,
you
it wasn't budgeted in the
recall-
right line item. This year, I put it in the line item that's
Yeah.
entitled supplements. I think it's, what, I don't even know the line items yet. So, but it's in the line item that's entitled supplements so that I can track it.
And when we talked last year, before, about this time, I said there's an error in this budget somewhere, I'm not sure where. That was part of it, because my budget reflected $1.something billion that he had not spent nor had I asked for.
Right.
But it was like, everybody, not everybody, but generally speaking, and I'm going to do a quick history lesson if I could. There are pockets of money, and everybody accuses us of hiding money, and guess what? Sometimes it happens. Okay, so that's what happened. One of the benefits of the zero-based budgeting that we've done this year is to uncover those sources of money so that you all know and see where it is. So this is, while confusing, it is a cleaner budget than we've had, and that's how come we were able to recoup the dollars that I said were there all the while and then some. Okay, because bear in mind, you never spend your entire budget. That's how I've operated. You just don't spend it all. And that's what leads, when I first became superintendent, okay, everybody was broke. Everybody, there was no money, and then Mr. Yancy came in and said, you know you got $5 million. I said, no, I didn't know that. So that's where we started to go down that path of reinstituting, and shortly after that happened, you joined the board. We put back assistant principals, we put back nurses, we did all that kind of thing because you have money. And the issue, that built up because you started with $1 million, okay, from 2008. Nothing changed, so it rolled over. And you still budgeted. So you then had $2 million. It was not spent, then it was budgeted another $1 million, $3 million. So that's how I ended up with $5 million. And traditionally, what is good about this process that you go through now is that suppose I'm Swamp City principal, okay, and I have a school budget of $400,000. And here's what we used to do and we have done. If I had $400,000 and I spent $300,000 of it, guess how much was budgeted the next year? Another $400,000. So you see how things kind of builds, so that if you're looking through zero budgeting at this point, this helps us identify and get rid of those pockets. But I'm not talking about something that just started with me, I'm going back decades.
Right.
Okay? So now that I'm on my way out, you folks have a clearer view of what's the budget looks like.
So, can someone explain if we basically hit the reset button, right? What we did?
Basically,
We just hit the reset button, so we should start back at zero.
Yep.
How did we end up with $1 million deficit, budgeted deficit?
Well, I think perhaps we could look at that and
Just kind of curious.
the same thought crossed my mind. If we have this money, why would not balance?
Right.
And I'll let the CPA talk about that better than I can, or the CFO talk about it. But I think we could have looked at some of our unassigned fund balance that's going forward and plug that, I think. I don't know. I'm going to leave that.
Well, first, let's talk, so when we zero-based budget, we know what our revenues are. As a school district, your revenues are fixed. You got your FEFPs and you have your property taxes. Pretty much that's about all we have in the general fund. So we know our revenues. When I was building a budget, I ignored the revenue side and simply built it based on probably starting with the most expensive thing we have, and that's our people. The biggest asset we have, but it's also the most costly asset we have. So we built, every person is built in there, even vacancies. And for someone, you're asking, I built people in at 100%. So if they will be there for only 95% of the year, let's say that they start 2 weeks late, or let's say that because of when they start, their health and life insurance don't start for another 30 days or 60 days. So there will be savings throughout the year that I've not built into this budget. I said it is going to cost $9,000 for his salary, congratulations, for his benefits, $9,000 a year for my benefits, $9,000 a year for his benefits. So all of that is built in at 100%. Mr. Paletti, I think where he was going, one of the things he was trying to indicate was, we could have said, well, MRA's only doesn't take health insurance, or whatever, whatever their differences are. We could have, instead of budgeting it at that flat figure, that would have been one of the areas. But other than that, every line item that I created was based on last year, which is kind of an incremental, but I didn't start with the not dollar amount. I started with what did they buy? And I think that's the difference, why it was a modified zero-based. It wasn't based on last year, except for what did we buy last year? Which is how, by the way, some of the things got missed. There were certain items along the way that I found out that, well, we didn't spend it last year. Last year was the end of the 4th year of the contract. We need another 3-year contract. So did we miss that? Yes, I need to know this a little bit better before I actually implement another zero-based budgeting. But that's every line item. That's why this little beauty was home with me this time. But we were working nights and weekends trying to figure out what was spent in the prior year, what should be spent. Now, that being said, we've got a budget right now that is what we should have spent.
Now, if we can further clarify, suppose we have a vacant position, was that budgeted at the full amount? Okay, there you go.
That's where I was going.
If you have 35 vacancies, which is no stretch of the imagination, with the cost of $60+ thousand a year, and we budgeted those 35 at 60, here's $1 million. Okay, that's what's budgeted because we've gone through and looked at everything at the full cost for that person. Now, we could have, in the past, it has happened, said, well, this social studies teacher at Coastal Middle School was a full-time sub. That position did not cost as much. But what are you going to do if you base your budget on that, if you're able to get a full-time teacher? You need to have a line item with that amount of money in there.
Agreed.
So you're going to be $1 million short on paper, but you're not going to be $1 million short because Mr. Seeley isn't here and I don't see him on the computer. But we're not at 100% staffed right now. So we call that kind of like riding the waves, or riding between the waves. And so we do that, but you are set to fill those positions.
Right.
If the people come in and it's budgeted. So there goes the money.
Which I agree, I think we need to have certified teachers in every position we can have.
Yeah.
If we can staff them that way, I agree,
Absolutely.
that's what we need for sure.
And I think
So I like the fact that you do budget that.
if we had budgeted part-time subs, what do you think that message is?
Right.
Let's have part-time subs.
But my question still though remains, if even, so are you telling me that we're $1 million over just in salaries then? Is that our only overage?
Overage, no, that wouldn't.
Our budget, the deficit is 100% in salaries only?
No, I mean, you can't really say that because the deficit is the revenues minus the expenditures.
Right.
So it's all the expenditures. And we know that one of the things I did this year was I added a $250, I hate to harp on that, but we added $250,000 because we knew we needed to start spending money replacing the Chromebooks. You could zap that. That could be considered a one-time use of fund balance. It could be considered an ongoing use of fund balance until it's not fundable anymore. Let's exclude that. Puts us at $750,000 on balance. I would say we probably, and then if we budgeted positions and instead of being 100%, we said 95%.
But you're still in personnel. I'm talking anywhere else. Where else are we spending more?
Personnel will be your biggest, because that's 80%.
Yeah, 80% of your budget.
Is the
Okay.
personnel.
And that's what I'm asking.
So
Is there anything
primarily
else
be-
out there?
The one thing that you could look at are contracts. We made a run at a contract this time, and we need to give it one more year, and that's how performance matters. Because we need the data that it generates. The elementaries use performance matters for science. And Dr. Monday uses performance matters. Performance matters data.
Easy for you to say.
Yes. In her reporting. So there are ways that we can probably get focus that we pay for already to do that, but we haven't done that yet, so that needs to be something we look at. You can look at all the others, some of our contracts we can't touch it, we gotta have them. But that would be it. 85, 83, something like that percent of our budget is personnel. So when you look at the expenses plus benefits, that would be the biggest portion of the deficit.
Which I know, I mean, a lot of our revenues are restricted. We can't do anything with them anyway, other than what they're designated for. I get that piece. But I'm just kind of curious, what else is there out there that we can look at?
Well, the one thing we did do, and I think y'all remember this, is at the very beginning, I think I tapped travel expenditures, which is training. I think we had budgeted district-wide, it was general fund-wide, about $110,000, and I cut that by 10%. Now, it's going to end up, I bet, we're not even going to use that, because I personally have to attend and get CEUs every year. I'm doing it all virtually, so that's going to all be savings this year, and I think everybody's going to be seeing that type of savings. But again, you certainly don't want untrained personnel. That would hurt us badly if we didn't have trained personnel district-wide.
And that cut was made because we can get by at this point with the budget, we can get by with that amount less. Because we didn't overspend that particular budget, so cut it.
Right, correct. Absolutely.
We present this data throughout the year, and I'll go back to, I think you were looking at page 12, when you were looking for the energy services. When you look at the data in that format, you kind of see where the targets are, where the targeted expenditures and areas are. Even with our little pie chart, you can see no matter what you do to purchase services, because the big one is, of course, K-12, nothing you can do with that.
Right.
So after that, no matter what you do with purchase services, you might save a few $1,000. As you know, we plan to do with our maintenance, janitorial services. We definitely plan to do that. I think everybody's been put on notice that you've got to look at it this year. Kevin was here.
It's on the big screen.
I knew I saw him somewhere. But Kevin and I had this discussion about some of his contracts. And he said, we're under contract for a lot of this stuff. We will go out for bid and redo it. But right now, you've got a contract. So some of that is, we've got to be thinking about it, we as administrators, we as directors, whatever.
Okay.
Just, also, you mentioned K-12. We talked about we had the budget based on 1,600, or was it 1,800?
1,600, yes, sir.
1,600, they're now at 3,900.
Yeah, I saw in the annual financial report, where they were looking like something about 4,000 or something like that. Was the
They're
estimated number.
anticipating going to 5,000.
So, yeah, that's,
You understand also that they get a less FTE than we do, because they don't have brick and mortar to pay for it, all that kind of stuff. So they get per FTE of approximately $2,000 less than a student who goes to, goes to high school.
then we get a
That
piece of that.
$5,800 or $5,400 multiplied by 5,000, and you get 5% of that, you're talking in excess of $1 million coming back from this one, as opposed to 200 or 300,000 we got. If the COVID piece did well about it. It matters not in the state where they go.
Right.
They get a piece of their Escambia, Duval, Alachua, whatever, is where we run their records.
Which was a good move on our part to join up with that K-12 program.
Yeah.
And so we will be coming back, tonight we've got the year-end budget adjustment for last year, but later on this fiscal year, we'll have to come back with a budget adjustment for that program, because if we're getting funds for 4,000 students, they're gonna want their money for 4,000 students. So we will come back with a budget adjustment as one of those.
Good conversation. Mr. Buddy, one of my questions, I know in the past we talked a lot about reaching out to teachers and admin about programs that they're using in the classrooms. Have we been able to reach out to them recently and say?
We
what are
are
you using?
starting at on
Kind of doing like a survey to say.
well, we're starting the discussion because we have some things we need to look at that are the beginning of the year bumps. We're having to get through those. We have sort of a major bump that looks like it's happening in NHS that we need to deal with, and then we'll get on that, but we'll discuss things with the Teachers Association first, because they have a pipeline way to the teachers. Not all of them, but they have a pipeline in there to that, and believe me, whether you like it or not, if the association thinks that they can save money and get more for themselves, that's what they're gonna do. And so let's look at that piece, so that we can start doing that.
I just think it's crazy to pay for programs that I know are being used for, they're really not rigorous.
Well,
or-
performance matters is one of them.
But I understand the data collection there, that matters. I get that.
I've said that before in the past, before myself, that we need to look at,
Because that's twice now we're trying to get to execute that. And under the old Genesis program, we could not replicate what we needed, but under focus, it looks as if we can.
So, I mean, it just makes sense.
Somebody's
Use what
gonna
you're
have to do
paying
the
for.
work for that.
Well, it's still, I mean, cost effective.
We're paying for that anyway.
Right.
That's one of those contracts you're not gonna be able to.
I mean-
Well, Mr. Brown, do you have any other questions or
No,
concerns?
I'm listening, go on listening.
Dr. Bird?
Listening.
Dr. Bird?
I,
Dr. Bird? Do you have any, you got questions, anything else to discuss? All right. Mr. Vasquez? Anything
Ma'am.
else? This workshop still got a little time.
Still got time,
Any
Norma.
questions or concerns?
You know, we will be down, are y'all familiar with what Ms. Nelson is running the meeting tonight?
No, I didn't address
No.
that.
Oh,
Surprise!
Mrs. Busey is in Jupiter visiting with the president. Okay,
The
he's
real
giving some sort
president.
of presentation there, talking about the environment. She was able to get to that audience. So that's where she is. We anticipate her calling in for the meeting, but
Once she gets
She
there.
might be able to make it. I mean, I'm sure that was over by 4 o'clock. It's only an hour away.
What time did it start?
3 o'clock?
3 o'clock by 4, but if they go out to dinner and all that kind of thing, I'm not saying that's what they're doing.
Can you imagine them going out to dinner?
Imagine having Secret Service all around you while you're trying to eat. I think it's pretty cool. Just
But I don't think she's going out to dinner with the president, but.
oh, she's with. Oh, I thought she'd be with like the whole White House crew. I'm like, man, she's lucky.
go to Mar-a-Lago and have dinner.
Yeah,
On Trump, of course. White House. Well, I don't have anything further to play. Do you have anything else?
Nothing.
but I want to assure you, the numbers in here, that's what I was going to say, I would call you if we didn't find anything
I
significantly out of
expected
whack. So we didn't find anything out of whack, not just significant or insignificant. It's, the numbers are.
Yeah, this is
You
true.
almost had me unreassured, there, Mr. Galletti.
I heard it shaking over here. Okay, well then I guess we will adjourn this workshop.
Yeah. And we're free until 5:30.
So you guys have half an hour? Get your list.
I got caught in the rain. I hadn't forgot you, but we got, I got I'll let you, I just got to show about another
Move now.
30,000, 40,000 off of them. About an eighth of an inch. You got the machine just a little bit off, bro. What, two?
So on a side note,
Well, that's what I was It's somewhere over.
everything is.
What's it?
I think they have a lot of kids that coming back.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm good.
So it's not easy at all.
Come on, you guys. You know, you retire, you get a lot of time.